Hello and welcome to Business Standard Views of the Week. Why are so many young boys and girls keen to work but are not actively looking for jobs? What is Paytm's missing link? And how can India tackle inequality? Subscribe to Business Standard and read this week's top opinion pieces to find out. We start this episode with an analysis of some of the numbers behind India's rising unemployment rate. India's unemployment rate was 7.9% in December 2021. This does not mean that the remaining 92.1% were employed. It does not even mean that 92.1% of all working age people were employed. The unemployment rate merely tells us the proportion of the working age population that wants to be employed to earn some wages or profits through the work, but in spite of its efforts to find employment, is unable to do so. The employment rate is the more useful indicator. It is a ratio of the employed to the total working age population. India's employment rate is abysmal at 38%, less than the global rate of 55%. In his latest column, Mahesh Vyas asks why several Indian working age adults want to work but don't actively look for employment opportunities. Is it the lack of jobs or is it the lack of social support for women to join the labor force? India's unemployment problem is not reflected in its unemployment rate. Its problem is the low employment rate and its discouraged young female labor force. In a related editorial, Business Standard explains that besides the problem of unattractive jobs, there is also the factor that areas with a surplus of unemployed or underemployed individuals are not moving to areas where additional jobs are being created. This lack of mobility has been, of course, made worse by the initial lockdown during which migrant laborers were seen suffering the most. The editorial adds that effective targeting of vulnerable sections with social security benefits, reducing the disincentives to migrate, upskilling of individual workers, and improvement in the safety and security of women would be important steps in increasing employment in India. Another persistent challenge for the Indian economy is addressing its highly unequal growth. A recent report by Oxfam India noted that 84% of Indian households suffered income losses in 2021, while the wealth of the richest segment increased. There is no dispute that the issue of inequality needs to be addressed. The K-shaped recovery from the pandemic may not be sustainable in the medium term. If income doesn't recover soon, it will affect demand in the medium term. The concentration of income and wealth will also have implications for social stability. In an editorial, Business Standard explains that the government would do well to increase the tax to GDP ratio by 5 percentage points over time with corrective measures. One way to do this would be to remove tax deductions on investments for individual taxpayers, which essentially benefits the better off sections. Similarly, the government can adjust its expenditure to create jobs for low income groups. One of the biggest policy weaknesses over the years in India has been the inability to create a sufficiently large manufacturing base for labor intensive products, which would have created jobs at scale and improved income levels. This is another area the government must focus on. Now let's talk about the missing link that could rescue Paytm's dud of a debut on bourses. Paytm's stock has eroded over half the value from the initial public offering price of Rs 2,150. In his latest column, Shyamal Majumdar writes that the most sensible way of managing this massive confidence crisis is to put your head down and focus on the missing link, a clear focus on making its business sustainable and profitable. Ashwath Damodaran, professor of finance at the Stern School of Business at New York University, advised Paytm CEO Vijay Shekhar Sharma of addressing the company's abysmally low take rate. Take rate refers to the percentage of gross merchandise value that Paytm records as its revenues. Analysts have noted that the take rate has in fact plunged from 2.18% in 2017 to 0.79% in 2021 as the company has chased users. Majumdar adds that Vijay Shekhar Sharma is avoiding talks about his company's profitability and making incorrect comparisons between Paytm and Bajaj Finance. Finally, Majumdar sums up his argument by adding that blaming investors for insufficient understanding of Paytm's business model can have only a limited shelf life. Now let's talk about news publishers and their digital dilemma. Does the rise of subscription-led news make good journalism a privilege of the well-educated or well-to-do? Does it kill collective discovery and consumption of news, thereby harming a democracy? As news publishers find succor in subscription revenues, these are some of the questions worth worrying about. Many of the early movers and legacy brands like the News Minute, the Quint, the Hindu, and Times Internet are focusing their efforts on subscription revenue with good reason. It takes thousands of reporters on the ground, lots of time and money to get the quality of journalism that informs a healthy democracy. For too long, publishers have relied on advertising, which brings 70 to 80% of a newspaper's revenues to fund news. For years, offline subsidized digital growth. The pandemic destroyed that model. As ad revenues plummeted even while audiences rose, publishers figured the best way to future-proof the business was by going pay. Currently, India has just about a million subscribers to news sites. Entertainment OTTs have over 100 million. It will take many years, lots of money on tech and content for news publishers to get those numbers. In her latest column, Vanita Kohli Khandekar asks whether the rise of subscription-based digital news outlets will create a walled garden of the well-informed. With the well-off being able to pay for news, will this leave the masses reliant on an algorithm-driven, free news cycle that is being weaponized by political parties and other groups to polarize society? Clearly, there are no easy answers to the question of what will replace the broken business model of news journalism. Most importantly, publishers need good intentions with a spine, a good dose of capital, and some out of the box thinking to get journalism out of its rut. Moving on to international affairs. Despite the renewed priority being given to economic self reliance, China has redoubled its efforts to attract foreign investment. In 2020, China opened up its financial market to foreign entities who could now set up wholly owned banks, launch mutual funds, offer wealth management services, and undertake underwriting activities. The most prominent American financial companies, including BlackRock, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and the Bank of America, have all announced plans to expand their China business despite the prevailing US China geopolitical tensions. On December 2, 2021, Vice Foreign Minister Xi Feng gave a speech to the US China Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and the US China Business Council. He urged the US business leaders present to speak up and push the US government to pursue a pragmatic policy towards China, stop conducting wars in trade, industry, and technology, and stop creating ideological and geopolitical conflicts. This was accompanied by a thinly veiled warning. It's good to enjoy the shade under the big tree. Conversely, if the relations between the two countries deteriorate, the business community cannot make a fortune in silence. In his latest column, Shyam Saran explains that for China, trade and commercial relationships can be used as geopolitical leverage whenever it suits the country's Communist Party leadership. Chinese President Xi Jinping has previously called for import substitution in key sectors, but at the same time has advocated enhancing the dependence of international production chains and supply chains on China. China has articulated a strategy that aims at reducing its dependence on foreign partners while enhancing their dependence on Chinese partners. The geopolitical intent behind this brand of economic statecraft needs to be understood and factored into strategies for meeting the China challenge. Finally, we bring this episode of BS Views to a close with a thought-provoking analysis of China's recognized tactic of negotiations and renegotiations. China makes a commitment that it has no intention of honoring. It later provokes conflicts, changes the facts on the ground, and renews negotiations. India has tried similar tactics with less happy results. Either it is not as smart as China or it has less clout. The result is a string of setbacks in one international arbitration forum and court after another. Even as WTO has repeatedly ruled against India in trade disputes, action has followed for the seizure of Indian assets overseas. In his latest column, TN Nenan asks if there are basic lacunae in the country's business, legal, political practice that need to be addressed. It is possible that a government used to arbitrarily changing the terms of engagement with its own citizens may assume subliminally that a written contract is not the final word, leading possibly to careless drafting or non-application of mind. What follows is an inadequate perception of costs should things go wrong, as they did with the Devas contract. As cumulative experience should teach us, fuzzy approaches have costs, so do your homework before signing, not after.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.